Well, thank you very much. This has been a big couple of days for me. Yesterday I found out, yeah, point that right at me. Yesterday I found out that Pops had been nominated for an NAACP Image Award, and about 10 minutes after that I found out that it was going on to the New York Times bestseller list next week. So, Mazel tov indeed. I had to brag about that. It's a wonderful thing to be here. I'm delighted to be here. And I am delighted to be talking about a man who was, well, delightful. You can say a lot of things about Louis Armstrong, which obviously is why I wrote a book about him. But if you have the good fortune to speak to anyone who knew him personally, be it casually or intimately, you can bet that they'll all tell you the same thing. He was a truly lovable man. Now, I've spent most of my life in the company of artists, and one thing I can tell you is that the greatest ones tend not to be especially lovable. Likeable, yes, sometimes. Charismatic, yes, sometimes. And not infrequently irresistible, for it's part of human nature for us ordinary people to want to warm our hands at the fire of a great creator. But those fires are very hot indeed, and I've known any number of people who got badly burned as a result of keeping company with greatness. Now, Louis Armstrong was different. He was a great man who was also a good man, kind and generous and considerate. And unlike many good men, he wasn't even slightly boring. He was utterly unpretentious. He didn't talk in pompous cliches. He loved to laugh, and he knew how to make other people laugh. And on top of all that, he was the greatest jazz musician who ever lived. Armstrong was one of the cultural giants of the 20th century. America has never produced a more significant artist. I rank him right alongside Aaron Copland and Robert Frost and Frank Lloyd Wright. But unlike those men, he was also a great entertainer whose music was and is loved by ordinary people all over the world. In 1964, he actually knocked the Beatles off the top of the pop charts with his recording of Hello, Dolly. Aaron Copland never did that. You can see why I was drawn to the idea of writing the biography of so singular a creature as Satchmo, or Pops, as his friends called him. Now, needless to say, I'm not the first person to have done so, but I am the first biographer to have had access to 650 reel-to-reel tapes that Armstrong made during the last quarter century of his life, many of which contain astonishingly candid recordings of his private after-hours conversations. Armstrong switched on his tape recorder whenever the spirit moved him, and so you can hear him chatting with friends over dinner, getting high with an old pal in his dressing room after a show, even trying to coax his wife into bed at 5 in the morning for a little hanky-panky. Not only do these tapes shine a bright light on his personality, which was far more complex than most people realize, but they also make it possible for us to know the full stories of such key moments in his life as his 1930 marijuana arrest. That's a big part of what made me want to write Pops. Nowadays, most folks know me as a drama critic. I'm the drama critic of the Wall Street Journal. But I'm also a trained musician, the first one, in fact, ever to write a fully sourced Armstrong biography. I started out as a professional jazz musician, a bass player, before becoming a full-time writer. That experience, I believe, has helped me to understand Armstrong's music and the world in which he lived and worked from the inside out. In Pops, I've tried to translate that knowledge into plain English and weave it into the incredible story of Armstrong's life. As Duke Ellington said, he was born poor, died rich, and never hurt anyone on the way. But how did he work that miracle? In the course of writing Pops, I came to feel that Armstrong's triumph was as much a function of his personality as of his musical genius. If you don't understand the one, you won't understand the other. And it is Armstrong's personality to which I want to introduce you now. So let us start in the best possible way by watching him at work. What you're about to see, if all goes well, is an excerpt from the earliest surviving film of Armstrong on stage. It was shot in Copenhagen in 1933. He is singing and playing Dinah, with a band of musicians from Europe. Would you play the video, please? You know, I've been playing that clip from coast to coast, and every time I do, everybody claps. That is the Louis Armstrong who took the world by storm in the 20s and 30s, the public Armstrong. In Pops, I take you backstage to meet the private Armstrong, for there is more to Louis Armstrong, much more than most people know. Though he was known the world over for his million-volt smile, Armstrong was a tough-minded, realistic man who always knew the score, whether it was about race relations or the music business or anything else. He loved to tell tales about his life, and he told them very, very well, for he was not just a gifted musician, but a gifted writer. Tallulah Bankhead, one of his biggest fans, said that he uses words like he strings notes together artistically and vividly. Armstrong strung his words together very neatly indeed when he told the story of his encounter with a gun-toting Chicago gangster in 1931. He was working at a mobbed-up nightclub called the Showboat when what he described as a big, badass hood named Frankie Foster came backstage after the show and told him that he would be playing in New York City the next night. Armstrong said he already had a gig in Chicago. Foster pulled his pistol and cocked it. Here's how Armstrong described what happened next. Jesus, it looked like a cannon and sounded like death. So I look down at that steel and say, well, maybe I do open in New York tomorrow. I tried to get that side of Armstrong into Pops too, because it's as much a part of his genius as anything else. Joe Glazer, his manager, once said that Armstrong was a real man. He reminds me of something that my namesake, the Roman playwright Terence, wrote 2,000 years ago. I am a man, and nothing is alien to me. Louis Armstrong was a real man, and nothing was alien to him, and he turned it all, good and bad, into music. Now I'm going to read you part of the prologue to Pops, in which I try to convey Armstrong's personality in words. So now, an excerpt from Pops, A Life of Louis Armstrong.